Hello and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by Derby Research School, which is supported by the Education Endowment Fund. My name is George Turner and I'm the head teacher at Ivy House School based in Derby City. In today's webinar we are going to be talking about cognitive science at Ivy House and how we apply evidence-based cognitive principles to support learners with profound and multiple learning disabilities. Derby Research School has a whole host of information that you can find on their website, on their social media accounts, on their YouTube channel. They offer a range of different support for schools and organisations, so I'd really recommend looking at them for more information. Ivy House School is a specialist school in Derby dedicated to educating children and young people with profound and multiple learning difficulties and severe learning difficulties. The school provides a nurturing, inclusive environment with personalised learning pathways, therapeutic support, and it also has a strong emphasis on communication and life skills. Ivy House is known for its holistic approach, working closely with families, professionals, to ensure that each student reaches their full potential in a safe and supportive setting. And I'm also wearing a bow tie as it's Dress to Impress Day, so I wouldn't normally be wearing one of these. So, what is cognitive science? Cognitive science is gaining an increase in influence in education, and many existing and developing educational approaches are described as inspired by cognitive science. Many of these approaches have actually been practiced or described as effective pedagogy without any reference to cognitive science. So, for example, quizzing pupils on topics is being common even without this being a thought of a form of retrieval practice. It's really important that all educators understand the core concepts that underpin what cognitive science is. The graphic on the screen really demonstrates that well. So the EEF have produced this, and it just defines some of the key terminology to support teachers, support staff and school leaders in building a shared understanding of these concepts in their school. So in today's webinar, we're going to go through some of these and unpick them together. So the principles of cognitive science are typically derived from two areas of research: cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience. So cognitive psychology is underpinned by interpretive, behavioural and observational methods. And in cognitive science, it's commonly derived principles from lab studies in which different ways of influencing learning are tested and their results are observed for individuals or for small groups. Cognitive neuroscience is underpinned by brain imaging technologies such as functional imaging, which is also known as fMRI, and test principles by examining the psychological response of the brain rather than the behavioural response of participants in experiments. So this graphic has been produced by the EEF and shows a simplified version of how our brains and memory work. So memory can be separated out into sensory, working and long-term memory. The process of going from seeing or hearing something to storing it in your long-term memory goes through several stages. So some key things to know are that learning requires information to be committed to the long-term memory. Information is processed through the working memory, and the working memory has limited capacity and can be overloaded. We see this in our setting, and we talk to our staff a lot about chunking and how a neurotypical student and adults would remember 3 to 5 chunks of information. So it's really important that we aren't overloading our students with various input or stimuli so that they can actually process that information in their working memory and then commit it to their long-term memory. There are lots of possible factors affecting the impact of cognitive science techniques. So it could be the teachers and the teaching, pupils' individual factors, which obviously would be different for each student, the classroom and social environment, activities, topics or subjects. At our school, a lot of what we see is that students who have complex health needs struggle with seizures, therefore they have had a bad night's sleep. They will come into school very tired, therefore they aren't very alert, which has a huge impact on them. Another thing that we see a lot is that sometimes the environment could be too noisy at certain times of the day, which then has an impact on the cognitive science techniques that we use in school. It's also important for us as our school. Obviously, we understand that we have many challenges with our students and their individual needs. So, a lot of our students have limited working memory, which means it's harder to know and remember more. So, it's even more important that these principles are applied, and we ensure that our curriculum is spiraled and very repetitive. So, it's continually revisited in hope that it's coded into long term memory. Spaced learning is shown in this graphic quite well. Spaced learning is distributing learning and retrieval opportunities over a longer period of time rather than concentrating them in a massed practice. Distributing learning across time improves retention, and this is shown in Howard Jones' 2014 Research Insight study. He looked into neuroplasticity and suggests that repetition and distributed practice improve learning outcomes for individuals with complex needs. It improves memory retention, reduces cognitive overload, encourages deeper processing, and supports learners with additional needs. So that repetition across different contexts really helps reinforce the learning. So in a mainstream, this may look like multiplication tables on a Monday, practicing with games on a Wednesday, and then a quiz the following week. At Ivy House, if we were to give an example, that might be that we would implement something through a sensory story approach. So we would be repeating key concepts throughout tactile, auditory, and visual stimuli. And we'd be doing this at different times of the day. So, for example, if we were teaching the concept of soft, it may be that we incorporate a feather in the morning sensory session. We would then use a soft blanket in a physiotherapy session later in the day, and then gentle water play in hydrotherapy throughout the week. Learning should then be embedded through routines for that long-term retention. There's an interesting case study by Ninden Hewitt in 2001, which is about intensive interaction, and it found that repeated scaffolded interactions over a period of time improved engagement and communication for learners with PMLD. Interleaving is repeatedly reintroducing students to similar but slightly different contexts or activities to assist with drawing of comparisons between related but discrete items of learning. Alternating between different but related topics enhances problem solving. It helps learners to make connections between those similar concepts. So, a mainstream example may be that in geometry you are problem solving with algebra exercises rather than learning them separately. At Ivy House, a good example would be instead of focusing on solely using cause and effect switch activities, alternating between tactile switch activated toys, so vibrating and spinning, music-based switch activities, communication aids with switch access, and this method helps generalise the understanding of pressing a switch leads to an effect. And this graphic shows how to alternate that, going from topic C, B, A to A, C, B, and mixing it up. This then strengthens the long-term memory connections and has a huge impact on students. Retrieval practice is the process of recalling information from memory with little or minimal prompting. So, using a variety of strategies to recall information from memory, for example, flashcards, practice tests for quizzing, or mind mapping, means that we are actively recalling information and which boosts memory and understanding. In classes, you could do this by low stakes quizzes, flashcards, and questioning to reinforce learning. This encourages active recall through consistent cues. It supports learners to recognise patterns and anticipate responses. So a mainstream example may be that you would use self-testing or peer quizzes before an exam instead of passive rereading. In Ivy House, this may look like using consistent sensory cues to aid retrieval, such as sound cues, so a bell before snack time to prompt recognition. It also may look like tactile prompts, so using a specific textured object to signal a transition from one lesson to another. There is a study by Knight and Webster in 2020 which found that eye gaze retrieval practice significantly improved communication skills in non-verbal PMLD learners. So for a learner engaged with an eye gaze device, using repeated exposure to symbols in different contexts, so for example, drink, using that symbol at snack time and in role play sessions had a positive impact. There are several strategies to managing cognitive overload, focusing students on key information without overloading them. So, for example, by breaking down or chunking subject content or using worked examples or scaffolds, and reducing unnecessary information prevents overload. Chunking and scaffolding and worked examples aid learning. Breaking tasks into small steps reduces overwhelm, and this ensures a low stimulation environment, supports that focus. So a mainstream example may be that you would use a step-by-step guide in maths to simplify problem solving. An example at Ivy House is we ensure that environments are calm, we reduce background noise, we use low stimulation learning spaces for learners who are sensitive to sensory overload. We break tasks down into small, clear steps to avoid that overloading with multiple instructions. And instead of presenting an entire sensory story at once, we focus on one element of the sensory session per lesson. So, for example, on Monday, you might introduce sounds, and on Tuesday, you might introduce textures. So working with schemas, which can also be known as mental models, scripts or frames, are cognitive structures that help organise and store information in meaningful ways. They allow learners to connect new knowledge to prior understanding, making more efficient and improving retention. So organising information and grouping that related concept together is much easier for recall. Reducing cognitive load allows learners to process new information more efficiently by linking it to existing knowledge. Supporting problem solving helps students apply that knowledge across different contexts by drawing on previous experiences. So a mainstream example might be that you are activating prior knowledge by asking students, where do animals live? You will show examples, so a bird in a nest, a fish in water. You then use a storybook about animals in different environments to gauge interests. So concept mapping, using simple visual organisers with categories like desert, ocean, forest, Arctic, to sort and match animals to their correct habitats. And you'll use analogies and comparisons, which deepens understanding. Discussing the adaptations by linking new information to what they already know, and those cross-curricular links, so expanding the schema. So for example, in an English or literacy lesson, you might then write a short sentence or a story about their favourite animal and its habitat. An example Ivy House would be that we would activate prior knowledge by using a sensory cue so that students are already familiar with. We'll provide consistent, predictable experiences so that the students can associate them with hot and cold. You might use objects of reference, so for example, a warm blanket for hot or an ice pack for cold. So with the concept mapping, we'd introduce a real-world sensory experience rather than an abstract visual. So we'd provide a hot water bottle or an ice cube for the student to feel. And using analogies and comparisons, build that meaningful connection. So we'll relate the experience to something familiar. For example, the sun feels warm like your cosy blanket. The ice is cold like the wind on your face outside. And we'll use verbal reinforcement, facial expressions and exaggerated reactions to emphasise those contrasts. Scaffolding and repetition strengthens the schema over time, so we would revisit hot and cold experiences in different settings. So in water play, you would have warm versus cold water. During snack time, warm soup versus cold yoghurt. Outdoor learning, so sun on the skin versus a cold breeze. And we'd use routine-based learning. So, for example, always having a warm drink in the morning and a cold drink in the afternoon. Cross-curricular links, so expanding the schema over time. Music and movement, using songs like the sun is hot, the snow is cold, with tactile props. And switch-activated learning, so using a fan to create cold air and a heated pad for warmth when pressing a switch. Multimedia learning, also known as dual coding, can be broken down into three main areas, so tactile input, auditory input and visual input. So dual coding is using both verbal and non-verbal information such as words and pictures to teach concepts. Dual coding forms part of a wider theory known as cognitive theory of multimedia learning. Combining visuals and verbal information aids memory. Effective use of images, diagrams and animation supports learning. So for example, pairing a scientific explanation with a labelled diagram. Using a combination of verbal, visual and tactile inputs supports understanding through multiple sensory modes. So an example at Ivy House would be using an object of reference alongside spoken words and symbols. So when teaching bath time, we would use a real sponge that you would use in the bath for tactile input. We would use a picture symbol for a bath for visual input and running water sounds for the auditory input. This enhances the memory and anticipation by using multiple consistent cues, which strengthens learning. Engaging multiple senses helps it compensate for sensory processing differences. Increasing the student's independence so that learners gradually recognise routines and may signal preferences. It supports communication and builds associations between objects, sounds, and actions, aiding non-verbal communication. By embedding multimedia and dual coding principles into daily routines at Ivy House, we ensure that we create meaningful learning experiences tailored to the needs of our students, fostering their engagement, recognition, and participation in their environment. Embodied learning is based on the principle that cognition is deeply linked to physical movement. Research shows that when learners engage in active, hands-on experience, they develop stronger cognitive connections, improving memory, engagement, and understanding. Encouraging active exploration rather than passive learning, this helps students internalise concepts through body movement and interactions. It improves their engagement by making learning dynamic and multisensory and encourages that active participation. So in a mainstream setting, this might look like an acting out or drama session where you are acting out a historical event, using gestures to reinforce maths concepts, and having a practical hands-on science lesson. For PMLD learners, physical interaction is essential for understanding, their engagement, and sensory processing. Activities should be multisensory, interactive, and personalised to each individual's needs. So an example at Ivy House of a lesson may be that we would use objects of reference to introduce different weather conditions. So a warm water bottle for sunny, a cool spray bottle for rainy, a handheld fan for windy. By showing weather symbols or pictures and pairing them with real-life experiences, we would then play weather sounds in the background, so rain sounds, wind whooshing to show the rainy weather. We would then offer a light misting of water on the students' hands using a spray bottle to simulate rain. We'd tap fingers on a surface to mimic raindrops, and we may consider putting their hands in water, so it might be warm water or cool water to represent light versus heavy rain, using drums or rain sticks to create rain-like soundscapes. At Ivy House, embodied learning is woven into daily routines, therapy sessions and classroom lessons to ensure that maximum engagement and meaningful learning experiences take place for all of our students. There's lots of additional research that you can look into for supporting cognitive science in PMLD education. Ninden Hewitt in 2001 demonstrated that consistent responsive interactions over time enhance engagement for learners with PMLD using their intensive interaction approach. Using consistent personal greetings, facial expressions and touch cues reinforce recognition. Music and cognition in PMLD found that music therapy enhances memory retrieval and emotional engagement. Using personalised songs to mark transitions, so we at school use specific songs for lunchtime and time for learning. Eye gaze technology in learning found that retrieval practice using eye gaze technology improves symbol recognition and independent choice making in PMLD learners. And incorporating daily retrieval tasks using eye gaze activated communication boards. So make sure you have a look online and in books and contact us if you need any additional support. Staff continual professional development and learning is essential when supporting students with their cognitive science knowledge, but also it's really important to think about those concepts with staff. So we've ensured that we've embedded cognitive science training programme for all of our staff. We took part in an 18-month programme with Ambition Institute, and we delivered 3 levels of training based on individual knowledge and expertise. The programme included fortnightly coaching and 90-minute sessions with external coaching every 2 weeks. This approach led to exceptional outcomes for our students, while also significantly enhancing teachers' knowledge, confidence and application of cognitive science principles in the classroom. Building on this success, we've then developed a comprehensive cognitive science training plan for all support staff, which now, 6 months into implementation, we've seen some really positive outcomes, with staff demonstrating increased confidence and effectiveness in applying cognitive science strategies. We always ensure to use research and evidence with things that we do in school. So we use the EEF's guide for effective professional development and also their guide to implementation. Our school development plan is based off the implementation plan of Explore, Prepare, Deliver and Sustain, and we found that we've had great impact with all of these things in school. So to conclude, we found that integrating cognitive science principles with adaptive, multisensory and movement-based approaches can maximise engagement and learning for our students. Research shows that small, consistent changes in practice, for example, embedding retrieval cues, using spaced learning, reducing cognitive load, can all lead to measurable improvements. We've ensured that we have collaborated with therapists, assistive technology specialists and families to ensure that learning is tailored to each student's individual needs. And by continually refining evidence-based strategies, educators at Ivy House can empower learners to develop skills in communication, independence and engagement. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this webinar. Hopefully you found it helpful and as a bit of an insight into how we use the cognitive science principles at Ivy House School. If you would like to find any more information about Derby Research School, I've just put them on the screen again, and you are more than welcome to contact me at Ivy House if you have specific questions related to PMLD learners. Thank you.